Alright, I am going to be talking about the developing carious lesion. I always feel like on the first day of DEHY 120 that we have a lot of stuff that we're going over as far as what's required of the class and clinical expectations and service learning project, and we have a couple of the guest speakers that we don't quite get in as much emphasis on some of the things for what we're going to be learning and the Canberra, our Carious assessment, our Carious risk assessment, and some of the background information that you need for that. So I'm going to go over this as a video that you guys can look back on in case you've missed something or we don't get to it. You at least have the information and you can get it on your own time, pause it, take notes, that kind of thing. I'm going to be using Mrs. Corpola's PowerPoint, which is great. I don't see any reason to develop a new PowerPoint or anything like that because she's got really good stuff in here. So as far as the theories of carious development, there was a Dr. Miller, an American dentist in Germany, and he realized that there was a way that demineralization was occurring. There was lots of speculation at first on how cavities would start, and they had worms, they had chemicals, parasites that they talked about, other people researched, and Dr. Miller realized that demineralization was occurring by the way of acid. He saw that there was decalcification of enamel and dentin in a preliminary stage, and then he saw the dissolution of the softened residue at a later stage, and saw that acid was causing the primary decalcification, and that it was produced by fermentation of starches and sugars from between the teeth. He knew that microorganisms and the carbohydrates and acid, but he didn't understand the initiation of smooth surface decay and didn't understand why some people are decay free, why some have arrested decay, or some have specific areas of teeth that are more susceptible to decay. So when we look at enamel is the hardest structure in the body. It's not renewable, so once it's gone, it's gone. Enamel is 96% mineralized, and that's compared to dentin, which is 70% mineralized, cementum, which is 65% mineralized, and alveolar bone, which is 60% mineralized. A lot of people think that bone is more mineralized than enamel, but enamel is 96% mineralized. So enamel is porous, so there are acids that can go in and out of the enamel structure. And we talked about hydroxyapatite as the primary enamel crystal, and that was where we wrote the Ca10 in parentheses PO4, outside of the parentheses the 6, and then the OH2. I'm going to hold up a little post-it note, hopefully we can see there on the top, the hydroxyapatite. That is the principal mineral component of teeth and bones and calculus, as we found out in preclinic, right? And then in the fluorapatite, we have the fluoride ions replacing the hydroxyl ions and making that a more perfect crystal, a more resistant, a more acid-resistant crystal. There are units in the enamel that are called rods and prisms. And I'm going to kind of put a picture in front of here. This is primitive, I know, but here's a picture of the enamel rods, how they're stacked. There's spaces between those rods, and there's prisms within those rods. And those inner rod spaces, fluid can diffuse into those spaces, and in and out, that fluid diffusion can occur throughout the enamel. And it's an ongoing process where we have a demineralization when we've got a more acid, lower pH fluid going in there, and then we've got a higher pH remineralization when it's back to normal pH, I should say. So we're looking for that balance. We talked about incipient decay or incipient caries being the beginning of the caries process, and this is where it's in that outer enamel layer. When we look at the tooth from a side cut view, in the outer enamel layer, the incipient caries starts. Kind of goes like a little triangle. I drew it like a triangle last semester. It can take months to years for a lesion to develop, for that incipient caries to become a frank caries and go through the dentin enamel junction. so the DEJ, which is between the enamel and the dentin. If it stays within the enamel, it's incipient caries. Once it gets through that junction, the DEJ, dentin enamel junction, then it becomes caries, or a frank caries, overt caries. We've got these alternating periods of demineralization and remineralization. Demineralization is the dissolution of calcium and phosphate from the hydroxyapatite crystal that the enamel is made of. So it's lost into the plaque, into the saliva. When the pH returns to normal, then the calcium and phosphate are available to go back into the tooth, the outside tooth enamel surface. Fluoride can promote that remineralization process, and it must have calcium and phosphorus available with the fluoride to go back into the tooth surface. So demineralization is the dissolution of calcium and phosphate. And then the remineralization is when the calcium and phosphate, and sometimes the fluoride, are replaced back into the area that started to weaken within the enamel. Those are ions that are in the saliva and plaque. Now, with a lesion development, there's a cumulative effect. One exposure isn't going to necessarily give you a cavity, but when you constantly have a negative demineralization or a negative mineral balance, a negative calcium and phosphorus balance, then if that is constantly negative and you don't have the rate of remineralization at the same time over an extended period, instead of an incipient lesion, which we don't have to do anything about, which we can sometimes arrest or stop in the outer enamel layer, it becomes a frank lesion or an overt lesion, which is through the DEJ. So the earliest development, we're going to see an incipient lesion in this outer white enamel area. It's going to be within that area. We'll see the changes in the enamel. The second stage, there's an actual cavitation. It goes through the enamel into the dentin, the second layer of tooth, which is a softer layer of tooth, which is only 70% mineralized compared to enamel being 96% mineralized. Now, we'll consider it rampant when the time between those two stages, the incipient lesion and the overt or frank lesion, when it happens very fast. It's usually due to a frequent exposure to sugar or xerostomia. Somebody will get put on like high blood pressure medication, say, and they have xerostomia, and all of a sudden in a 6-month time period, 1 year time period, they will have a lot of areas that maybe were incipient, now are definitely frank or overt lesions. Same thing with that constant exposure to sugar, because you have the period where you take in like a drink of pop, and we've talked about this before, but you take in a drink of pop, the pH in your mouth drops. And depending on what type of sugar, so for pop, say 20 minutes, the pH in your mouth is a lower pH. It's more acidic, it's weakening the tooth structure. After 20 minutes, the pH goes back to normal, and the minerals from your saliva go back in and remineralize those areas. How about the 20-ounce bottle of pop? That's the worst invention ever, because you're constantly sipping and you're never getting back to normal, or very rarely getting back to that normal pH where remineralization can occur, and you're in this constant state of demineralization or weakening of the tooth structure. So here's some caries that are on, and this is the PowerPoint that you have on Moodle, so if you can't see it well on here, or you want to follow along on a bigger PowerPoint, use your Moodle PowerPoint. The interproximal caries right here, and then here is a rampant area of decay on lower right 5, which is number 29, lower right 6, number 30. So we are needing to recognize this in our patients and what stage they're at. We need to recognize the sugar, the frequency of sugar in their diet. We need to recognize the xerostomia in their diet. We need to look at their habits and have them make changes to their habits so that the incipient lesion doesn't become a frank or overt lesion, doesn't become rampant caries. So we need to stop them and change their behaviors. That's what this semester is all about, getting patients to change behaviors, recognize what's happening within themselves, and educate them about what they need to do. So it's super important to detect things when they're small. So frequently, I won't say frequently, but on schedule, taking bite wing x-rays to check between the teeth for any incipient lesions. Then we're taking steps towards remineralization. We can have a patient use prescription fluoride. We can make sure a patient is using fluoride toothpaste. We can have them use a fluoride topical rinse. We can have them use MyPaste or Recaldent or Enamelon. There's some casein in cheese, which is anti-cariogenic. So we can recommend as a snack that they would eat cheese. I mean, it sounds small. It sounds, kind of like, really, Mrs. Tram, eat cheese? But yes, that's one of the things we can do. Now, any one thing is going to be the key in changing this. It's going to be a lot of little things. So talking to them about the frequency of diet. I will tell my patients that it would be better for them, teeth-wise, to drink a whole 2 liters of Coke at lunchtime versus drinking a little Dixie cup all day long, because the frequency of sugar in that little Dixie cup is going to be what keeps the pH in their mouth low, keeps their areas in their mouth weakening or in a demineralization state, and those areas are going to progress to decay if they never get back into the normal pH, never get the calcium and phosphorus minerals to go back into the tooth structure in a remineralization type situation. So frank lesions are treated operatively, so they do a filling, and we want to make sure that we do not have that bacterial infection in the tooth, which is what tooth decay is. We don't want to take it from one tooth to another and transmit it. So we want to prevent an autogenous, which is from yourself, infection and transmission. When we go into the occlusal surface and there's a caries area that we take our explorer and go into, and then we take that same explorer and go into the pits and fissures of the next tooth, we could be causing an autogenous infection or transmission from tooth to tooth. So keep that in mind. For the incipient lesion, it's difficult to look at these early lesions or to find these early lesions. So we want to know what we're looking at. We want to work with our dentist to make sure that we're on the same page as far as what an incipient lesion is. We want to find out what the patient is doing that is causing these incipient lesions. And the white spot lesion, the white spot, if you saw that on a smooth surface, particularly near the gum line, where plaque sits, you would possibly see a white spot lesion where plaque sits along the gum line. This is the earliest clinically noticeable stage, and we can look in certain areas of the mouth, and we know that they're more susceptible in certain areas of the mouth, and we can show the patient this in, holding a hand mirror in front of them, showing them what's going on with them. This isn't somebody else's mouth, this is their mouth. And that's a warning stage. So clinically, we will see a chalkiness to the surface, we will see a roughness, it'll be a little bit more porous. We're going to look at x-rays and compare the image of the x-ray today to what we've had in the past. We're going to look at the progression. Maybe it's been like that for 5 years and nothing's changed. Great. We're going to show them with camera. We're going to keep track of that in their chart with camera. So we're going to look at that just for progression on an active white spot lesion. Then clinically, if we had a white spot lesion that's not progressing, it might appear smooth and shiny, might be pretty slippery, pretty hard. We'll see it, but it's pretty non-porous. It's not much different than the actual enamel. So we're still going to compare with previous images, and we're going to see that it hasn't progressed. So we're still going to have our camera images. So once it's progressed, it will be the more chalky, more porous, more rough. And then when we feel it, it's going to feel different. Clinically, in the inactive, it's going to be hard. We're going to notice a discoloration, and a discoloration doesn't mean that it's a cavity. It doesn't mean that it's an active carious lesion. Clinically, if it's active, it's going to feel a little soft. It's going to be a little leathery, like you could almost scale some of it off, and it's going to be a little more discolored. Might be even towards the brown stage. Active root caries versus inactive root caries, that's the area where it would be on the root surface, on the area that's below the CEJ, the cemento enamel junction. So on a white spot lesion, we're hoping that that surface remains hard and intact. That white spot's really not going to go away. There's been some research with MyPaste, and there's some people that claim that using MyPaste has that lesion go away. But typically we might see that white spot, but it doesn't progress. It can extend along multiple teeth where there is plaque remaining. If somebody is missing plaque, we want to tell them where they're missing and direct them to that area so that it doesn't progress to the white spot, which is the first step on the way to caries. As far as fissure caries, develops at the bottom of the fissure, and it eventually coalesces at the base of the fissure, and it will become a cavity at the base of the fissure. Remember, we do pit and fissure sealants to protect that top area so that the bacteria does not get down in there and start coalescing and coming together and multiplying at the bottom of that fissure. With this microscopic zone, we're talking about the first microns at the surface of the enamel are intact, and they're very fluoride rich. That's why the enamel feels hard. There are very microscopic pores that allow for some demineralization, for that hard outer enamel layer to break down. Because on a microscopic level, like I showed you in that picture earlier, there are some areas between the enamel rods. So we want to be careful not to break through as we're taking our explorer. We want to make sure we don't break through the enamel. The surface zone, there's only 1% of porous space, but as we get into a lesion, there's more and more areas that we could break through and break into. This is starting on the outer layer of enamel, and this is coming down into the enamel layer. So translucent, dark body of the lesion, and then just the very surface zone. So in 1954, Dr. Orland and his colleagues, they proved that bacteria was caused by acid. They had everything in moderation. So some of these research studies you have to look at everything in moderation, but they had some germ-free rats that did not develop caries when fed a cariogenic diet. And they looked at the transmissible nature of the caries. That was by Dr. Keyes. And these studies were very important in showing us on a human how the caries process worked. So caries inactive hamsters developed caries after contact with caries active animals. So they found that this could be transmissible from person to person. So a mom to a baby, a cavity-free person to a non-cavity-free person through saliva and bacteria in the saliva. Bacteria, acidogenic bacteria must be present, and it has to have a means of contacting and containing acids at a point on a tooth. So dental plaque is how a lot of this transmission. It's pretty significant for many oral health problems. This microbial biofilm plays a major role in the initiation of dental caries and in periodontal infections. The biofilm is significant, and we studied biofilm in preclinic. It's significant in the formation of calculus. Essentially, calculus is mineralized dental biofilm. And a person's general oral health is going to depend on their daily plaque removal. So if they don't remove plaque, it contributes to unpleasant personal aesthetics, like it looks terrible, smells terrible, and it contributes to disease. And periodontal disease and dental caries are both infections, transmissible diseases that are caused by pathogenic microorganisms that are found in biofilm. We've been talking about the caries process a little bit, and the fact that dental caries is a disease of the dental calcified structures, so a disease of the enamel, the dentin, and the cementum. It's characterized by the demineralization of the mineral components and the dissolution of the organic matrix that it's made up of. The organic matrix is a hard substance, and the dissolution is making it a softer substance. Particularly, we're looking at strep mutans. So here we've got mutants, streptococci, strep mutans as the initial causing bacteria for caries. And then the lactobacilli are the continuation bacteria for caries. So there's different kinds of cavities. It's all the same process. The pits and fissures, the smooth surface. There's early childhood caries, which would be on a smaller child. And then there's root caries, which would be on the root surface of the tooth. Sorry, I'm flipping a page here. I've got some more information here. Saliva is very important. In the function of caries, there's prevention by the saliva because of its rinsing and neutralizing effect. So salivary clearance for the fermentable carbohydrates to be carried away from the teeth. If there's a higher salivary flow rate, there's a faster clearance and there's more buffering. A very important component of saliva is the buffering, because normal pH of resting saliva is 6 to 7 pH. The strep mutans and the strep sobrinus, S-O-B-R-I-N-U-S, are initially the causing agents, the etiological agents in the caries process. The lactobacilli and actinomyces, A-C-T-I-N-O-M-Y-C-E-S, are bacteria that have significant roles in the progression of the carious lesions. So when somebody has a lower saliva, higher carbohydrate-based diet, higher frequency of sugar, that promotes the growth of these strep mutans, these strep sobrinus, the lactobacilli, and the actinomyces in the caries process. So studies show that there are high numbers of bacteria in the smooth surface lesions, and their ability to stick to the tooth, their ability to produce polysaccharides to stick to the tooth, and then their rapid production of acid production is a reason why these bacteria, these strep mutants, even though it says MS here, it's strep mutants in high numbers. The traits of the strep mutant bacteria allow it to be cariogenic. And it's very virulent because it can survive feast or famine. It's damaged by lactic acid, and this is the most common human bacteria. It's very virulent. So the strep mutants are the primary cause of caries, versus the lactobacilli being the smooth surface. In an advanced lesion, lactobacilli are found in high numbers. So again, strep mutants, strep sobrinus in the initiation of caries, and then the lactobacilli and the actinomyces in the progression of caries. Strep mutants need a solid tooth surface, and they need to be able to attach by the acquired pellicle or through extracellular proteins, through adhesions. So on the fimbria of these organisms, they have those extracellular proteins to be able to attach to the acquired pellicle. And then there has to be the presence of sucrose. When they ingest the sucrose, they produce the sticky extracellular polysaccharides that allow the bacteria to attach and to accumulate. Strep sobrinus lacks that adhesion required, and it only accumulates when there's more of a sugar diet, frequency of sugar diet, or high frequency of sugar diet. I'm going to stop there for now.